Picture this. You've been sick for months, maybe years. You're taking steroids, prednisone, hydrocortisone to survive. Your body stopped making its own cortisol. And then one day, your endocrinologist walks in with a smile and says, "Good news. Your labs are normal. Your adrenal glands are waking up. We can stop the medication." It sounds like the finish line, right? Pop the champagne. But for thousands of people with secondary or iatrogenic adrenal insufficiency, that moment doesn't feel like a victory. It feels like a car crash. The labs say healed, but the body says dying. Today, we are talking about the dark, messy, nonlinear reality of recovering your adrenal function, and why feeling worse when you're supposed to be getting better isn't a sign of failure. It's actually part of the process. I'm Jake, and this is The Deep Dive. Joining me is Rachel, who has been digging into the physiology and the psychology of HPA axis recovery. Rachel, this topic seems to break every rule of medicine. Usually, healing feels good. Why does this feel so bad?
It really is a paradox, Jake. And to understand it, we have to look at a specific article from My Adrenal Life titled "Recovery from Secondary, Tertiary, and Iatrogenic Adrenal Insufficiency Isn't a Straight Line." The core thesis here is brutal but validating. Recovery is not a light switch. It is a biological construction project that happens while you are still trying to live in the building.
I love that image, but before we get to the construction project, we need to define the building. Most people have heard of Addison's disease. Is that what we're talking about today?
Actually, no, and that distinction is critical. Addison's disease is primary adrenal insufficiency. That means the adrenal glands themselves, those little triangular hats sitting on top of your kidneys, are damaged, usually by an autoimmune attack. In primary AI, they are destroyed. They will not grow back. Those patients need hormone replacement for life. There is no recovery of function to discuss there.
Okay, so who can recover?
We're looking at central adrenal insufficiency. This includes secondary AI, where the pituitary gland stops sending the signal, ACTH, to the adrenals, and tertiary AI, where the hypothalamus stops sending its signal, CRH, to the pituitary. The most common cause of this, by far, is iatrogenic AI. That means caused by medical treatment.
Steroids.
Exactly. Glucocorticoids like prednisone, dexamethasone, or high-dose hydrocortisone. When you take these drugs for asthma, rheumatoid arthritis, or cancer, your body senses all this cortisol floating around. It's a negative feedback loop. The brain says, "Whoa, we have plenty of cortisol here. Shut down the factory."
So the hypothalamus stops yelling at the pituitary stops yelling at the adrenals, and the adrenals just go to sleep?
They don't just sleep, Jake. They atrophy. They shrink. If you don't use it, you lose it. If you've been on steroids for months or years, your adrenal cortices are physically smaller and weaker. So when the doctor says, "Okay, time to taper off the prednisone," you aren't just removing a drug. You are asking a withered, atrophied organ to suddenly run a marathon.
And that's where the not a straight line concept comes in. The article mentions that labs can change before the patient feels better. How is that possible? If the blood test says I have enough cortisol, why do I feel like I've been hit by a truck?
This is one of the most frustrating parts for patients. We have to talk about the difference between a static number and a dynamic response. A morning cortisol test is a snapshot. It tells us that at 8 a.m., your adrenal glands squeezed out a baseline amount of hormone. Great. But life isn't a snapshot. It's a movie.
Meaning stress response.
Precisely. Healthy adrenals are dynamic. If you get cut off in traffic, or catch a cold, or have a fight with your spouse, your cortisol should spike to handle that stress. In recovery, your adrenals might be able to make that baseline 8 a.m. amount, but they have zero reserve. They are maxed out just keeping you upright. So when any stressor hits, you crash. You have symptoms of low cortisol, nausea, extreme fatigue, dizziness, even if your baseline lab looked normal.
That explains the physical side, but the article brings up something called taper grief. I found this fascinating because we usually associate grief with losing a person. This is grieving a drug?
It's grieving safety. Think about what high-dose steroids do. Yes, they have terrible side effects, weight gain, insomnia, bone loss, but they also provide a massive artificial buffer against stress. You feel invincible in a weird way. You have energy, the steroid blanket, as some call it.
And the taper rips the blanket off.
And leaves you naked in the cold. It's a form of what psychologist Pauline Boss calls ambiguous loss. You are grieving the loss of your functioning self, and you're entering this terrifying gray zone where you don't know if your body will ever work right again. The article highlights that patients often feel worse during recovery than they did when they were fully suppressed. That psychological whiplash, I'm getting healthy, so why am I crying on the kitchen floor, is a huge part of the process.
It seems like there's a disconnect between the medical timeline and the patient timeline. I did a quick search on the history here. Philip Hench and Edward Kendall won the Nobel Prize in 1950 for discovering cortisone. They called it a miracle drug. It took years before doctors realized that withdrawing it could actually kill people or leave them in this zombie state. Are we still bad at managing this?
We are better, but we aren't perfect. The Endocrine Society released guidelines recently that acknowledge this complexity, but clinical practice often lags behind. The article points out that recovery is outcomes based on so many factors: how long you are on steroids, the dose, your age, and just bad luck. Some people recover in months. For others, like those with tertiary AI from long-term suppression, it can take a year or more. And crucially, and the article is very honest about this, some never recover fully.
That's the scary part. The article explicitly says this post is not a promise of recovery. So if I'm a patient in this taper process and I'm feeling terrible, how do I know if I'm just pushing through the pain of recovery or if I'm actually in danger?
That is a million-dollar question. The article calls them the whispers. Before a full-blown adrenal crisis, which is life-threatening low blood pressure and shock, the body gives quieter signals. The article lists things like emotional shifts, irritability, anxiety, waking up unrefreshed even after sleep, subtle nausea, and loss of appetite.
The nausea thing is interesting. I've heard that described as bone-deep nausea.
Yes, it's very specific. It's often worse in the morning. And another big one is recovery time. Let's say you go to the grocery store. A healthy person comes home and unpacks the bags. A person in adrenal recovery might need to lie down for 3 hours just to stop shaking. That is a sign that your functional reserve is empty. If you ignore those whispers and keep cutting your dose because the calendar says so, you risk a crash.
So let's talk about the strategy here. The article mentions tracking. Is this just keeping a diary?
It's more than a diary, it's data collection for survival. When your labs are unreliable snapshots, your symptoms become the data points. The article argues that tracking patterns is more important than a single bad day. If you notice that every time you drop your hydrocortisone by 2.5 milligrams, you lose the ability to work for 3 days, that is data you need to take to your endocrinologist.
But that requires a level of advocacy that is really hard when you're exhausted. You have to walk into a doctor's office and say, I know the protocol says taper, but I can't.
It does, and that's why the article suggests specific language. Instead of just complaining, you say, since the last dose reduction, I am noticing a consistent functional decline. Or, my labs are stable, but my stress tolerance has disappeared. It frames it medically.
There's a line in the text that really struck me. Pausing a taper is not failure. I think that's profound because we are so culturally conditioned to think of progress as a straight line upward. If you stop, you're quitting.
Exactly. In the world of adrenal recovery, pausing is often the most productive thing you can do. It allows the adrenal glands to catch up. Think back to the atrophy. If you are running that marathon and your muscles, the adrenals, start to cramp and fail, slowing down isn't quitting. It's preventing an injury that takes you out of the race entirely. The goal isn't the fastest taper, it's the safest taper.
I want to touch on the distinction between glucocorticoid withdrawal syndrome and actual adrenal insufficiency. My research suggests they overlap heavily. Is it possible to have enough cortisol but still feel like garbage just because your body misses the high dose?
Yes, and this complicates everything. Glucocorticoid withdrawal syndrome is basically your body throwing a tantrum because it was used to supraphysiological levels way higher than nature intended. You can have joint pain, fatigue, and mood swings purely from withdrawal, even if your cortisol levels are technically safe. However, the management is often similar. You have to slow the taper. You can't bully the body into adapting faster than its biochemistry allows.
So let's play devil's advocate. Why not just stay on the steroids? If recovery is this miserable, painful, uncertain slog, and you feel better on the drug, why go through this hell?
That's the temptation, right? But the long-term cost of exogenous steroids is devastating. We're talking osteoporosis, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, thin skin that tears like paper, increased infection risk. The steroid blanket eventually smothers you. The goal of recovery is to get back to your own natural rhythm, which is healthier in the long run. But, and this is the key takeaway from the article, you aren't going back to the person you were before.
Right, the new chapter concept. You are not going backward. You are not broken.
It's a reframing. Recovery isn't a restoration of the past. It's building a new physiological reality. Your stress response might be different. You might need to be more careful with your energy for a long time. But the fact that your HPA axis is trying to wake up, that it's sputtering and coughing and trying to start the engine, that is a biological miracle, even if it feels terrible.
It is interesting how this mirrors the experience of recovery from other major traumas or addictions. The brain has to rewire itself. In this case, it's the HPA axis, the hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal loop, literally relearning how to talk to each other. Hello, are you there? Yes, send more cortisol. I can't, I'm tired. It's a noisy conversation.
It is a noisy conversation, and for a long time, the volume is turned all the way up. That's why the emotional volatility is so high. Cortisol regulates emotion too. When your levels are swinging wildly, so is your mood. The article validates that fear, grief, and confusion are normal. If you feel like you're losing your mind during a taper, it's likely just biochemistry.
We've talked about the biology and the psychology. Let's talk about the practical support. The article emphasizes that recovery should not be done in isolation. Obviously, you need an endocrinologist. But what else?
You need a community that understands the nuance. Family and friends often don't get it. They see you off the meds and assume you're cured. You need people who understand that off the meds is actually the most vulnerable time. This is where patient advocacy groups and articles like this one become lifelines. They provide the vocabulary to explain to your spouse why you can't go to that dinner party even though you look fine.
And it provides the vocabulary to explain it to yourself. I think self-gaslighting is a huge issue here. You think, I should be better by now. I'm just being lazy.
The article explicitly fights that. This is physiology, not weakness. If your cortisol is low, no amount of willpower will get you out of bed. You can't positive think your way out of a hormone deficiency. Accepting that is the first step to actually managing the taper successfully.
So if we zoom out, what is the big picture for someone listening who is in the middle of this taper trench? They are down to 5 milligrams of prednisone or 20 milligrams of hydrocortisone. They feel awful and they are scared.
The big picture is patience and advocacy. Know your baseline. Track your symptoms. Listen for the whispers so you don't have to scream for help later. And give yourself permission to grieve the stability you lost, even as you fight for the health you're trying to gain. It's okay to hate the process. It's okay to pause. It's okay to say, not today.
And remembering that uncertainty is the only certainty. As the article says, for central and iatrogenic AI, recovery is possible, but not guaranteed. Living with that ambiguity takes a lot of courage.
It does. It's the courage to live in the gray zone. And for anyone doing that right now, just know that your body is working harder than anyone can see.
that seems like the right place to leave it. If you know someone navigating the rocky road of adrenal recovery or steroid tapering, send them this episode. It might help them find the words for what they're feeling.